challenges and opportunities in India. One could argue that with high-profile cases like Vodafone and the lack of resolution on such high-profile cases, Vodafone once again being a case in point, this is a subject that should have India Inc. sitting up and taking notice. And perhaps that's why Mukesh Butani, chairman of BMR and managing partner of BMR Legal, has put together this book, Tax Dispute Resolution, Challenges and Opportunities in India and for India. I talked to him about the trigger for the book, the content, and some of the solutions that it proposes in a conversation. Tax Dispute Resolution, Challenges and Opportunities for India. It's an appropriate book coming at just the right time, and it gives me great pleasure to congratulate Mukesh Butani on this book. Thanks very much for joining us on NDTV. Congratulations. First, simple question. What prompted it, the book?
Thank you. I think there are various reasons why this book is here. One is I'm very passionate about the subject. So, I can't write on anything other than taxes. But I think more importantly, as someone having seen working as an advisor, working as a lawyer now, and having a lot of interaction with the government at the tax policy level, I just felt that it's important to kind of lay out a 360-degree view, which is not just my view as a practitioner representing the interests of large companies, but also what are the challenges that the tax administration faces, what are the challenges that judicial forum faces. And I also feel that India is a country with huge opportunities, and one of the opportunities is for us to attract investment, domestic and foreign. I feel that in the last decade or so, the changes that have happened in the manner in which we have administered the tax law has kind of shunned away a lot of investment. And I feel that it's important to lay down in a form of treaties in a balanced manner why has that happened. So that's really the core of the book.
So if, and I've heard this time and again, and I'm sure I've heard you say it, if clarity, consistency and certainty should be the bedrock of a tax system, how far away is the current system of taxation in India from those ideals?
I think we made a start to focus on the 3 C's, but I think we still have to cover a lot of ground. You see, if you just look at the last expert committee group, which was a commission actually, Tax Administrative Reforms Commission, it was 4 volumes looking at need for information technology, need for broadening the tax base, deepening the tax base, taking exemptions away, and disputes was just a part of that. I think it's talking about a rollout which is going to take 8 to 10 years. So you cannot have solutions to these problems. There is no quick fix. There is no short term, there is no short to medium term. All of these are long-term solutions. I think the way we should look at it is that if in the last 20 years of economic reforms, we can grow our FDI from $250 million to $50+ billion, what is it like it would be in the next 10 years? Can we say that India will receive FDI of $100+ billion every year? And if you add up the domestic investment, large, small, medium enterprises, what is the potential of this economy? I think economists tend to measure everything in GDP terms. But I think we also now to have policies that will help us support that kind of GDP.
So it's down to ease of doing business, and that's a stated goal of this government as well. But there's no denying the enormity of the tax dispute issue in India. I'm trying to simplify it because our viewers, will have a chance to read the book. Some may not comprehend everything in it. What's at the heart and core of our tax disputes?
I think, when people talk about tax disputes, their attention goes to, disputes in the court. So I don't think that this book is all about that. This book starts from, a little bit of education. How do the tax economics of this country work? How important are tax revenues for the government? Contrary to perception, we are amongst a very low taxed country. And when I say low taxed, I don't mean to say lower rate of tax, but compare tax to GDP, which is the first economic indicator. So, we are kind of 10 points lesser than the average OECD emerging economies. So I think as a country we need to collect more taxes. Now I know there are reasons we don't tax agriculture income, but even if you factor that a constitutional constraint kind of doesn't allow us to tax agriculture income, we should collect far more taxes as relative to our GDP. That's the first point. The second point is, why do tax disputes occur in a country? Is it because we don't draft the laws properly? Is it because we... Well, that's an important reason. Is it because we don't administer the law properly? Is it because our dispute resolution mechanism is not effective? So that's the other reason. Third, and I think which is a new concept in India, when tax disputes occur, when there is a difference of view between the taxman and the taxpayer, how do you really go about settling a dispute before it goes to trial in a court? So are there mechanisms which we don't have under the current law to settle a dispute? So what are the global best practices for settling those kinds of disputes? And finally, I've focused on how do we improve our existing court and judicial forum system to improve it, because justice delayed is justice denied, and that's also one of the important criticisms that we have, that once a matter goes to a trial in an Indian court, it takes years and years for resolution.
And I think that whether you're an individual or a large corporation, everybody will attest to that. But I wanted to just take one point, and I see that thought being echoed in the course of conversations today, which is the law itself. Is it inadequate?
Well, every government will talk about tax reforms. It's not just India. The question is, eventually, do governments reform or do they make it complex? I think it's a debatable point. I think the biggest challenge that we've had is that we've seen moving from a closed economy into a reasonably opened economy. People may criticize that, well, it's taken us 25 years of economic reforms to open up, but I think it's a fairly fast pace if you look at large emerging economies. But I think our tax laws have not kept pace with the changes. Our tax laws haven't kept pace with the changes in the model of businesses. I mean, do we have a chapter in our Income Tax Act that deals with taxability of e-commerce transaction?
Yes.
We don't. We may have a chapter that deals with banking or insurance, but the banking and insurance industry itself has evolved in the last 20-25 years. So have we now amended the tax law to cater to those changes in the banking model? Similarly, public utilities by way of power generation, oil and gas were all prerogative of the government and public sector undertaking. So you really did not have to have a detailed legislation to deal with those segments of the economy. Do we have that? No, we don't. We are not even segmenting taxpayers into small taxpayers, individual taxpayers, medium-sized taxpayers and large taxpayers. You see, in any country, the contribution made by these various segments of taxpayers are very, very critical, depending on the size of the economy and the complexity. In India, one of the reasons the small and medium enterprises go untaxed is because we do not have mechanism to track new taxpayers.
Sure.
So the burden falls on those limited taxpayers, which is people like you and me who earn salary income, which are subjected to taxes, and large corporations.
We're in the net and the news titans. But on a serious note, I mean, there are high-profile cases, and I'm asking purely from an academic perspective today. Take the Vodafone case. What have been some of the key takeaways when it comes to disputes and their resolution, and couple that with your research, extensive as it is?
Well, I've used a label, Vodafone is like a blot for India. And I thought a lot about it before using that term, but I just feel that that's how it is. I think the issue over here is not that Vodafone went on trial. The issue over here is that what happened when Vodafone succeeded in the trial. The issue over here is that still it continues to be an unresolved issue. Yes, the government has taken steps to come out with enabling law to deal with the retrospectivity of a law which in my view impacted India's competitiveness for doing business. We travel a lot, we meet with a lot of investors, we meet with large Fortune 500 companies. They all have one question for any tax advisor in India. So what happened on Vodafone? Why did the government amend the law? And after amending the law, why is it that it is still not a settled issue? So I think the world and the investors are looking out for answers to these questions. And I think we need to have an answer. I'm not trying to say that our leaders have not given the answer, but are those answers to the satisfaction of the investors? Or do the investors still continue to be believing that India is not a very certain environment? I think that's the push. To some extent, this government has taken initiatives. So, making repetitive statements that we are not going to have retrospective law, making statements that we want to clean up the system, making statements that we want to address this whole mechanism of the administrative part of the law, reining in field officials, I think are very, very important steps that this government is taking.
And it ties in with the larger point that you had made at the start of our conversation, which is there's an opportunity loss when investors are diffident.
Correct.
Worried about, taxes. We're embarking, perhaps, won't say when, but GST. And when one thinks about the disputes that could arise once that begins to roll out, am I exaggerating?
Let me answer your first question, the opportunities lost. You see, this debate is there in most emerging economies. I know we have a fairly advanced judicial system. It may work slowly, but it works very effectively. Rule of law prevails in our country, unlike some of the other emerging economies. But let's look at some of the emerging economies. Indonesia, China, many parts of Latin America, or some of the new emerging hubs like Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar. Now, these countries do not have a judicial system which is as advanced as India. These countries are hungry for foreign investment. Now, so how do they go about administering the law is very different than how we have gone about administering the law. Of course, we are at a fairly advanced stage compared to most of these nations in terms of our competitiveness, size of the market, so on and so forth. But I think that if we had taken a balanced view, that are you administering a tax law in a manner that you shun away investment, and if investment and employment, which is the motto of this government, is important, should we look at tax laws very differently? I think we could have done that balancing act very well, and we could have attracted more investment. To your other question on GST, I think that's really the last chapter of this book, which is taking a futuristic view of tax laws. Not futuristic view from the point of view of potential of the country, size of the economy that the country can get to in the next decade or two, but also the kind of complexities that are going to arise. India is no longer an isolated emerging economy. It's no longer a part of the BRICS club. It's a part of the G20. The G20-led base erosion and profit shifting is all about nations coming together, establishing consistency in their tax policies, lending an element of certainty to multinationals, preventing economic double taxation. It's not just about transparency. It's not just about exchange of information. It's a complete package of issues that you have to deal with. And then you, as you rightly pointed out, we have the GST law staring at us. You ought to now develop a completely new administrative system to address disputes under the GST law. So we are looking at, and I have not even talked about IFRS, and I have not talked about tax accounting standards. So I think we are now faced with a situation where there are reforms in the area of capital markets, accounting, tax laws, domestically and internationally, and all of this have a direct bearing on what kind of sensible policies do you have to make sure that you balance out the government's need of collecting revenues, expanding and deepening the tax base, and also making sure that you have sensible policies that don't scare away investors.
Well, Mukesh Butani, I can only hope that everyone in the tax administration watches this interview, picks up a copy of your book and reads it in detail. Thank you very much for joining us on NDTV.
Thank you for having me.